Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Latricia Naval-Ryan, Executive Director of the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative. We are so excited to have you with us today for the fifth session of the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative Community Wealth Building Commitment Series. We'd like to know who is joining us virtually, so please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and organization. Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative or AWBI, is a data-centered nonprofit organization dedicated to closing the racial wealth gap through community wealth building strategies. We serve as an umbrella organization and hub, if you will, in the ecosystem as a think tank, a community convener, a funder, data engine, and community development and philanthropic advisor. We move our work forward by leveraging national and international best practices and bold ideas, sharing those ideas broadly throughout the ecosystem, but particularly with our community of practice, which helps keep our work grounded in community to maximize impact. We also focus on addressing the systemic barriers to accessing capital by providing nonprofit capacity building grants and grants for innovative prototypes, as well as flexible grants and loans to Black-owned small businesses, and helping funders and capital providers maximize the impact, and in some cases, reimagine how they deploy capital to the community, all with the goal to increase shared prosperity throughout Atlanta. Ideas, capital, and people are at the core of our work to create an Atlanta where shared prosperity is a reality for all. As a follow-up to AWBI's first commitment series, as a follow-up to AWBI's first annual Community Wealth Building Forum, hosted virtually in March 2021, we are excited to host the Community Wealth Building Commitment Series, Closing the Racial Wealth Gap for Shared Prosperity. The series highlights organizations and initiatives currently implementing innovative community wealth building strategies. So we're really excited about this session today. These strategies serve as a driver to build wealth in a way that does not just extract from community to build individual wealth, but instead has a responsibility to promote engagement and investment to benefit the community as a whole. To guide this work, Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative has adopted 7 proven data-centered strategies to disrupt the systemic barriers that limit a community's ability to achieve sustainable economic growth. They include business enterprise development, including worker-owner models, which we will discuss today, capital funding, anchor institution partnerships and procurement, equitable land use and development, including affordable commercial space, workforce development, ecological resilience centered in environmental justice, as well as wellness to address the impact structural racism and the disparities that have on the mental and physical health of Black people. In alignment with the retention and anti-displacement pillar of AWBI's 1,000 Black Businesses campaign, we are including as part of our work a focus on employee-owned transition models. Supporting Black-owned businesses through a transition to employee ownership not only supports the well-being of the retiring business owner, but also preserves jobs and creates an on-ramp for wealth creation for employees. In the Atlanta metro region, employee ownership can also help close the racial wealth gap by providing many more Black workers with the opportunity to participate in and benefit from business ownership. AWBI and Project Equity are partnering to bring a concentrated effort centered on employee ownership to Atlanta. AWBI will work with community-based partners to introduce and expand awareness of the model to the community and ensure that Project Equity's resources are made available in the Atlanta market to support this additional pathway to shared prosperity for Black business owners and employees. Project Equity is a national leader in the movement to harness employee ownership to maintain thriving local business communities, honor selling owners' legacies, and address income and wealth inequality. Project Equity works with partners around the country to raise awareness about employee ownership as an exit strategy for business owners, and as an important approach for increasing employee engagement and well-being, which of course is increasingly important in this environment. They provide hands-on consulting and support to companies that want to transition to employee ownership, as well as to the new employee owners to ensure that they and their businesses thrive after the transition. It is my great pleasure to introduce Evan Edwards, CEO of Project Equity, and Teron Ferguson, who leads the organization's Black Employee Ownership Initiative. Evan began his career as the international business manager at the early leading technology startup, QuarterDeck Corporation. Bitten by the startup bug, he spent the following years in leadership consulting roles at a variety of early stage enterprises, including Bid.com. Guided by a shift in personal and professional priorities, Evan moved into the nonprofit sector as executive director at YMCA Corporation of Los Angeles, leading the turnaround of an underperforming business unit. Driven by the value of social enterprises and the vision of a generative economy, Evan's work with Project Equity creates strong collaborative partnerships across sectors. Evan is a graduate of Northwestern University and a proud supporter of Wildcat football, and has a certification from Stelter in professional fundraising management. Teron is advancing Project Equity's Black Employee Ownership Initiative throughout all the organization's strategic initiatives. He earned his BA in philosophy right here in Atlanta at Morehouse College and earned a JD from NYU School of Law. Prior to joining Project Equity, he practiced law at the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, under the leadership of Bryan Stevenson, where he advocated against death sentences, children detained in adult prisons, and facilitated parole hearings. Welcome, Evan and Teron. It is wonderful to have you with us today. We are excited for this discussion.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be back with you all.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. So, as always, my hope today is that we transfer some of the many conversations we have had one-on-one to share insights with the broader community. So, we're happy to have you and to officially launch our partnership. So, to get us started, tell us about Project Equity and why you're committed to employee ownership as a community wealth building strategy.
Sure. First of all, I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all, and I'm very happy that we're kicking off with this forum. Project Equity is a national nonprofit organization. We're based in Oakland, California, though we have team across the country. I'm in Southern California. Teron is in South Florida, and not pictured here, but on the call also is Sarah McBroom, who leads our regional engagement work. She's based in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we have programs and projects in various localities across the country. Project Equity leverages employee ownership as a strategy to bring economic resiliency and pathways to prosperity for low and moderate income communities, and in particular, communities of color. It is an important and relevant strategy because we happen to be at this inflection point in US economic history right now, where baby boomers, who own the vast majority of small businesses throughout the country, are retiring in the next 5 to 15 years. And as such, there is the opportunity to pass wealth that's created by small businesses from business owners, legacy business owners, to their workforces. And in particular, we see this opportunity to impact, again, communities of color as pertains to both businesses owned by Black folks, but also businesses that employ Black folks in large numbers. We see that employee ownership has been underutilized as a strategy in many regards because it's misunderstood, right? So there is this thinking that equity is only distributed to the C-suite. And in fact, there are shared ownership models that have existed for years and years that avail equity and ownership to entire workforces. So that's what we're seeking to leverage through employee ownership. And we have the benefit of time and we have the benefit of opportunity right now.
Excellent, excellent. And we couldn't agree more, and really excited to expand on bringing this model to Atlanta. So what are the economic advantages and the business case for employee ownership?
I'll take this one, Latricia. The economic advantages for employee ownership are that employee ownership has advantages for businesses, for workers, and for communities. So from a business perspective, employee ownership leads to increased profits. We've seen EO companies earn 8.5% more than traditionally structured businesses. Increased productivity. So we've seen EO structured companies lead to 2% growth year over year, as opposed to small businesses that are traditionally structured. Businesses also enjoy less employee turnover, and they're more resilient as their legacies are kept in place, with giving an owner an exit by selling the business to the workforce. But from the worker perspective, you hear the term employee ownership. Well, it's just that. Workers get equity and assets via ownership. So they move from wage owners to actually owners in the business. They have higher take-home household income. And one of the things I find to be most important is they have agency and voice in the decision-making and governance of their work. And if you think about what a voice in the decision-making at your job does for you, is it changes the relationship that you have to the thing that you do for the lion's share of your day. At the community level, employee ownership increases local spending. It raises civic engagement. But I think one of the big things we should think about is the psychological and spiritual benefit of a local community having their own homegrown wealth building engine. So think about, for example, in the Midwest, the pride and the identity that comes from making and manufacturing cars. Employee ownership takes that same type of work and identity connection to the next level. So overall, employee ownership might not be a silver bullet, but it certainly is a viable strategy, as Evan alluded to structurally changing how the wealth gap kind of persists in today's country.
Absolutely, and such a great opportunity, particularly now. So share a little bit about why is employee ownership especially relevant now?
Yeah, Evan alluded to this as well. Right now, we are faced with two twin crises. One is the international pandemic, COVID-19, which I'm positive that the participants on this call are well aware of, and how it impacts businesses from supply chains all the way to employee turnover. And if you're a brick and mortar business, just the ability to keep the lease and rent paid, the lights on, and so on and so forth. COVID has been very, very challenging in these past 2.5 years. But accompanying the COVID-19 strain on our small business community is the silver tsunami. And this crisis is, in my opinion, underreported, but it is the notion, or the fact rather, that over 50% of our country's businesses, small businesses, are owned and operated by baby boomers who are on the off-ramp to retirement. And so, I mean, this is almost an existential crisis for our small business tapestry, because 67% of businesses have no written succession plan. So what happens to these businesses that have stabilized communities, created jobs, and ushered in prosperity to communities for decades if we were to lose out these things?
And as part of our retention and anti-displacement pillar, we noted that in addition to introducing worker owner models, it's also important to offer estate planning and business succession planning. I'm a former estate planning attorney and did that for several clients for years, but understanding the impact not having those plans in place can have on a transition of a business, regardless of the reason for the transition, even if it's an exit, on the goodwill and good work that those business owners have put into developing and sustaining that business over time. If you don't have a good plan in place for the next stage of development for that business, all that good work can go to waste. And so it's an important point. So tell us a little bit about what is the opportunity for employee ownership in Atlanta specifically?
Good question. So I am biased, like you said. I spent nearly a decade in Atlanta. So, I mean, it is Atlanta. And we believe at Project Equity that if we can bake employee ownership successfully into the local ecosystem, introduce it properly to the market, then Atlanta has a spillover effect to be a proof point for the nation, and in the way that Atlanta serves as a proof point culturally, economically, demographically for the nation. But then there's, from a more factual, precise level, the business demographics that we're trying to impact are all in Atlanta. So, you know, we want to impact Black business owners and businesses that have a high density of Black workforce. Well, over 50% of our country's Black workers reside in southern states, and they are actually heavily, heavily concentrated in the Atlanta metro area, as you all might know, and the state of Georgia. There's also the diversity of sector. Because Atlanta has such a business and entrepreneurial spirit, you have a wide variety of businesses that can be leveraged to debunk one of the major arguments against employee ownership is like, are there sectors that this model can't work for? Well, to be able to accomplish this in Atlanta, the opportunity is huge because it says, hey, this is a model that not only helps businesses, workers, and communities, but there's no sector that's precluded from playing in the sandbox. The demand is also high. So 48% of the businesses in Georgia are owned and operated by baby boomers. So at some point, these people are going to want to not work anymore. And like you said, what happens to all the sweat equity, community goodwill, and service that they've been given to the community for decades? We want Atlanta and Georgia to remain vibrant and resilient, and we want to layer on the impending prosperity with business retention. The last thing that I would argue is that there are already a critical mass of successful examples in Atlanta. You have Augusta Industrial Services, Anna Julia Cooper Learning and Liberation Center, Bending Construction, Dixie Plywood and Lumber, Elliott Machine Shop, Essential Ingredients, Greenberg Farrell Architecture, just to name a few. And so imagine if we can leverage these success stories and this critical mass, add more to this pot in order to create a tipping point. Atlanta seems like it's the most fertile ground for this type of work right now.
Absolutely. And we have what I love about this model that often isn't talked about is there's a wide range of size of businesses. Often when introducing models like this, it's thought to be something on a grassroots level or cooperative level, but we have some of our largest companies in the region that are also employee owned. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to expand on that here locally.
Great.
So let's get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of how this works. How does the transition to employee ownership work? And can you share an example of a successful conversion and the outcomes of that conversion?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So our transition process has four main steps. We start with one-on-one consultations with business owners to explore their goals and educate them on employee ownership and their options, and of course, the process. For those that want to seriously consider a transition, we move to the second step, which is an in-depth feasibility assessment. That's essentially our due diligence process. As much as possible, we want to ensure the transition will be successful before even proceeding. So we work with the business to do financial modeling and a debt capacity analysis, and also talk through management transition plans. Then if we determine a transition is feasible, we move to the transition itself and coordinating all the necessary steps towards closing a deal. And then finally, after the transition is finalized, we provide technical assistance to the employee ownership team on governance, internal processes, et cetera. Now, the key aspect to this transition, the question that always arises is, how do the workers pay for the business, right? And so that's the secret sauce. We don't obligate the owners to buy the business. What we're doing in that feasibility assessment part of our work is, and I mentioned the debt capacity analysis, is we are looking at the business's ability to take on debt to pay the owner for the business, right? So if the debt capacity analysis renders that the business can take on $1 million in debt, then we'll essentially establish that as the sale price for the business. Now, a key consideration for us is the fact that we want workers to experience the benefit of employee ownership beyond governance and voice. As Tehran mentioned, we want them to actually feel the financial impact. So when we're doing the feasibility analysis and the debt capacity analysis, we're also ensuring there's enough margin so that workers can take home profit sharing. Those who are familiar with co-ops may be familiar with the term patronage. That's a form of profit sharing that is in the co-op model. We try to ensure that when we're structuring these deals, that whether it be on a quarterly basis or semi-annually basis or annual basis, and again, the workers are the ones who determine this, that they can release profit sharing to themselves based on the performance of the company. So just to double back here, so once we establish that value at $1 million, right, for the business, we're just saying that for discussion's sake, we'll then go and structure a loan for $1 million, and that check goes to the business owner. And then on a going forward basis, the business's cash flow services the debt. Typically, we try to structure the loans in 5 years, 7 years out. One of the challenges that we have in this space is that your typical lender, your typical bank, I know a lot of banks support all of us through their CRA commitment, so I won't call them out individually, but they won't underwrite loans that don't have an individual that's obligated as the term escapes me right now. They want one person obligated to the debt. I'm on the West Coast. You have to forgive me. My mind's not firing 100% right now. It's 8 a.m. The point being that we don't obligate any of the individuals in the organization, in the company, to be responsible for the debt. That's the reason why our due diligence process is so important, because we have to make sure that the deal is buttoned up, that the business can afford to service the debt. With this in mind, Project Equity has stood up our own fund, 2 of our own funds, the Catalyst Fund and also our Accelerate Employee Ownership Fund, which basically funds these transactions. And then additionally, we work with other lenders in the space to bring capital to these transactions. The work is really powerful. One example of our work is a firm in the Bay Area. It's actually a service business, a pizza restaurant, and you wouldn't ordinarily think of a pizza restaurant as one that would provide its workforce with a pathway to prosperity. That particular example, and you could see it on our website, A Slice of New York, has distributed $500,000 in profit sharing to its workers in the past 3 years. In an expensive market like the Bay Area, that's enabled the workforce to be able to stay in place, continue to live and work in the Bay Area. So there is this other impact of employee ownership in terms of anti-displacement, right? Both in terms of keeping businesses in place, but also allowing workers to remain stable in their communities. I would ask that folks take a look at our website to see numerous other examples of the power of this work. One that resonates to me in particular, we transitioned a company called Niles Pie, and the anecdote that is most powerful is the very first profit sharing check that the workforce received was around $9,000 per worker, which was far more than any individual check than any of those folks had ever received. One of the workers, Sarah Vega, tells a wonderful story about how when she received her first profit sharing check, she showed it to her son, and they discussed how it is that they were going to save some, but also how it is that they could actually spend some money for some things that they'd never been able to have and needed for years. And we have these sort of impact stories that we could tell on and on. At the end of the day, it just points to the power of this work and why successful conversions are so meaningful.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful story about wealth building. And particularly as these models can grow and scale. I mean, some folks here with us today are probably familiar with North Highland Consulting, which is an international firm based here, has over 5,000 consultants, but that's an employee-owned company. McMaster-Carr here locally is employee-owned. And has a wonderful, wonderful history of employee retention as well as growth and leadership in its sector. And so it's so meaningful for each family to be able to be in position to have this ownership opportunity and then to sit with family to determine how that's going to shape their future, right? And their ability to make decisions for themselves and their family that will ultimately last generations, quite frankly. And so it's really powerful work.
Yeah, that is truly one of the objectives of this work, to see that families have that economic resiliency, to see the wealth building impact, and to allow for families to be able to avail their next generations of opportunities that they themselves have not in the current generation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you talked about some of the resources that are provided to support conversion, but I know that, and you mentioned funding, which is critically important for our businesses to really thrive and grow and scale and transition in any way. Are there any other resources that you want to point out?
Sure. Well, we start our work by doing a lot of data analysis just to understand the viability for employee ownership in a region, and also to help business owners understand what it is that they can expect in terms of particular outcomes. We advise business owners to speak with, if they do have a financial planner or a tax planner in place, to speak with them. We help to educate those folks as well about employee ownerships. Oftentimes, a business owner's accountant isn't familiar with, for instance, the tax advantages that a business owner may be availed of by selling their business to an employee-owned entity. So some of the resources we provide start with just helping business owners to understand the advantages that they may see by exiting through employee ownership. We do a lot of awareness raising in the community more broadly, so that other key stakeholders in communities can recommend employee ownership as an exit strategy for business owners. I mentioned that we've stood up our Catalyst Fund. One of the things that we're doing in light of the pandemic and the Great Resignation is we are now offering working capital and growth capital loans to business owners who are willing to do a 30% transition to employee ownership. So 30% of the equity in the business transition to ownership by the workers. And we find that this is a great tool for a business owner recruiting, retaining, and rewarding their workforce. If you as a business owner are offering equity and the business down the street is not, you're probably more likely going to be the business that's going to retain your workers. So in addition to the financing that we provide and guidance to business owners on how it is that they should think about their exit, making sure that they're obtaining the correct tax treatment and so forth. And again, we don't provide that guidance. We make sure that they speak with their professional in that regard. Those are just some of the resources that we provide.
Yes, and so in partnership with AWBI, as part of this partnership, we would be working to make sure that any additional resource or access to experts that the businesses may need, that we help facilitate and coordinate that for businesses, because we want to ensure that not only they're aware of the model, but also fully prepared to explore why it's advantageous and be prepared to make a strong transition. So that's part of kind of the collective effort of our partnership that I'm so excited about, particularly given you. expertise. I want to, and just I'll just announce for the audience, we are going to be opening it up soon for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. But you did allude to some of the tax advantages of that. You know, when I had my estate planning and hat on, you know, nobody wants to talk about estate planning in general, but when you talk about the tax advantages of it, people start to be a little bit more intrigued. Can you talk a little bit about that and what those tax advantages might be for business owners?
Sure. So under Section 1042, you can see everyone's eyes glazing over right now.
Not too much detail, but just a high level.
In order to incentivize employee ownership transitions, within the tax code, there's a section called 1042. And basically what that says is if you're a business owner and you sell your business to an employee-owned entity, so ESOP, co-op in particular, you as the business owner may receive capital gains relief on the proceeds of the sale for up to 15 years going forward, and in some instances in perpetuity. Because many retiring business owners are of a certain age, in fact, those advantages will be in perpetuity. That isn't across every sale. There has to be certain other circumstances in place. I believe that for an ESOP, there has to be an S corp that's in place. You have to have operated for a certain number of years. But in fact, this is really powerful because once a business owner understands that, well, if I were to sell to such and such a strategic buyer, or I was to sell to someone else, I'm not going to see that tax relief, right? But if I, in fact, work with the Project Equity or one of the other organizations that do the work that we do, our organization actually forms the new entity, the co-op or the ESOP, and then the owner sells their business to that new entity, which is employee owned, right? And avails themselves of the tax benefits. So it's specific to incentivize business owners to want to sell their businesses to worker-owned entities.
We have a question in chat I want to bring in from Rod Batiste from Right Path, who asks, what % of deals are total exits versus strategic access to additional capital?
Sure. Well, our experience is over 90%. Now, you do see a number of ESOPs. We have not done one of these sorts of ESOP transitions. There are corporations that count themselves as an ESOP because they have 6% of their equity held by workers, right? It's interesting because, and I'm again not going to get into all the technical aspects of it, the threshold for ESOPs to receive tax relief, and I'm talking about the actual company, right? So the business owner can receive tax relief for selling to an ESOP. Once an ESOP is formed, that percentage of the business that is employee owned now receives relief from federal taxes as well, right? But then in certain instances, it's not as though all of the equity that could be released to the workers necessarily is. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. I can take these questions offline. The point being that there are quite a few entities that count themselves as partial employee owned, but in fact, they are just minuscule in terms of the amount of equity that's in the hands of the workers.
And when we talk about kind of this work together in Atlanta, what are the goals for this effort in Atlanta for you all?
Yeah, so on a few levels. First of all, we want to elevate the existing employee-owned businesses in the region, right? There are success stories already. We want to create our own success stories by particularly impacting businesses that are Black owned are those that have workforces that reflect density of Black workers. We want to elevate those stories. We also want to build into the ecosystem employee ownership as a business model that is regularly utilized either for transition of business ownership or as a tool to help drive productivity and employee engagement. And so to do so, we work with the lending community, and we work with technical assistance providers and lawyers and CPAs, et cetera, to get employee ownership on the map, help them to work with us to demonstrate and replicate the efficacy of the model. And then over time, as all of those actors in the ecosystem begin to take up employee ownership as their work, it allows us to bring the work to scale. So that's the long-term proposition for us in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll speak from AWBI's perspective. We certainly also are leaning more towards total exits and towards a larger percentage of ownership being transitioned versus that 6% you alluded to really create real value for the employees, but also a real opportunity for business owners for a strong exit, which is very much needed, quite frankly, for a lot of our community-based businesses where family members are not positioned or not interested in taking over businesses. But we do want to ensure that those businesses continue to thrive in our communities. So it's just important to fully embrace it as much as possible and as much as it makes sense for those business owners. But it is, I think, interesting to note that for business owners that may not be comfortable with a total exit at this point, can still create this opportunity of ownership for their employees on a partial basis until they are ready for a total exit. So I think that's an important point that we'll want to make sure that we emphasize. I'll pause again for questions in the chat. It looks like one just popped up. What impact does the rise in interest rates have on the model? And so I'll pause there.
Yeah, so for potentially, we are, in our current funding structure, our current fund structure, we don't anticipate that our cost of money will increase significantly. We have raised capital from what you all might have heard of as patient capital or mission capital. And there are certain return metrics that are attached to our capital fund as exists now. As we grow the capital fund and bring more capital into our fund, those metrics may change with the increase in interest rates, and that may in fact impact what it is that we charge going forward. But as of right now, our capital remains pretty cheap relative to what we're seeing in terms of increased interest rates going forward.
And again, AWBI is here to support this effort to make it accessible to the businesses that we serve. And so we will certainly be working to ensure those costs are as low as we possibly can. There's a more specific question around what is Project Equity's fee structure?
Right. So we don't charge for our initial consultations. Again, we operate as a nonprofit, and our mission is to see employee ownership grow as much as possible. So with that in mind, when we initially meet with business owners, first, second, third, fourth time consultations, we don't charge at all. It's only when a business owner decides that they want to move to the feasibility stage that we charge. And the feasibility assessment is on a sliding scale. It's based on a business's EBITDA. At the top end, it's roughly $10,000. At the bottom end, it's $5,000. I will say that through our partnerships with localities across the country, because these localities want to see employee ownership as part of their economic development structure, they've subsidized feasibility. So for instance, one of our partners is the city of San Francisco, and they, on an annual basis for a couple of years, have subsidized to the tune of 8 feasibility assessments per year. And essentially what this does is it brings down the barrier for business owners to experiment with the model. and much more likely then that it takes hold. And in fact, we've seen, business owners talk to business owners. And now that a few business owners have actually gone through the feasibility phase, now more business owners are willing to step up and actually pay the fee structure. And again, it is a sliding scale because we are sensitive to the fact that not all businesses can afford to spend the same amount of money for our services.
Exactly. And again, AWBI is in the business of supporting prototypes and proof of concept in markets so that it can be widely adopted to move our community wealth building strategies forward. So we'll be investing in those feasibility studies on behalf of businesses, just so we can make sure that and we also will be investing in community meetings and gatherings, convenings to raise awareness around this opportunity and to answer questions. And so that will be launching very soon. You'll be hearing a little bit more publicly about that very shortly. But we want to engage and get feedback, have an opportunity to understand what the local market needs, but also any apprehensions that might exist. So would love to talk about a little bit what are the common apprehensions you see folks have about employee ownership.
Sure, I think they're mostly just based on lack of knowledge. Business owners typically think, oh, my workers, they can't operate the business, right? Well, in fact, in most cases, actually, when we actually get into the feasibility analysis, and again, our feasibility analysis is both a due diligence process on a business's finances, but we also take a look at its operations. Oftentimes, we find that, in fact, the workers have been running the business for years, and the business owner is probably a little bit less knowledgeable in many instances than the business owner. But it's mainly that issue of, can my workers actually operate the business? And again, in most instances, we find that there is that capacity there. In instances where they're not, we do capacity building so that we build out the strength of the business so that the workforce can take it over. Other apprehensions are around, am I going to get a fair sale price? A lot of business owners feel like, well, if I list on Biz Buy Sell, or if I take my business to a broker, or for larger businesses, work with an investment banker, I'm going to in fact get a better price than if I sell to my workers. Well, in fact, the opposite is true. When you deal with an external buyer, more often than that, that buyer is going to look for means in which to grind the business owner down on price. Whereas if you're selling to your workforce, that sale price is set by our feasibility analysis and the debt capacity analysis of the business. And there are also sweeteners that we can build into a deal along the way, so an owner can see additional upside. But to the specific of your question, owners sometimes feel as though they're not going to get the proceeds from the sale to their workforce that they would if they sold externally. Those are the two biggest ones.
Yeah, and Teron, I know we had some conversations about kind of initial reactions when you're talking to business owners, and we'd love your thoughts too. I think I recall you sharing a little bit about what those kind of preconceived notions were and some other questions that they had. So we'd love you to chime in here.
Thanks. Two things I would add to what Evan just said is, if you have a particularly far-seeing owner that's interested in employee ownership, they're concerned with whether or not their workforce is going to be saddled with debt. Like, are they going to have to foot the bill for this transition? So you can imagine there's like, can they actually operate the business to the level and of adroitness that I've been doing it? But also, are they even going to be able to pay for this transaction, or am I giving them a problem that they didn't have in the first place? And so we work with owners to do what Evan did, explain how the financials of this transition work in a way that the workforce is able to pay for the debt through the future earnings. And the first thing we figure out is that debt facility. So that's one thing. I think the other question that owners are interested in is I built this business from my brain, oftentimes with my sweat equity and ingenuity. And so do I just completely relinquish all strategic input in the trajectory of the business? Is the brand equity and goodwill that I've generated in the community just going to disappear now that I don't no longer have my fingerprints on this enterprise? And the answer is no. We're not just cutting owners a check and telling them to go fishing, walk into the sunset. This is your business. You are an active participant in the conversion. And as a result, you can help to sort of steward the next frontier of the business. So I think those four things, like layered out, they usually happen, emerge in conversations with the owners, not linearly, extemporaneously, but our business development team is very, very skilled at being able to respond to various preconceived notions that owners might have.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because you have built this business over 30, 40 years and set the strategy for it. And hopefully during that process, and actually during this transition process, I know part of the training you all provide is making sure those employees are equipped with the tools that they need to actually run a business in that owner's absence. However, again, creating this plan is to create a full exit and business succession plan. And so as part of that, determining if it's an immediate exit or if it's an exit over time, how strategy will be developed, which employees will be engaged, what that governance structure will look like, or the new governance structure will look like, are all important components of this that parties involved have ownership and the opportunity to lead and drive. And also, I think I recall you and I talking about some business owners are concerned about if the employees will manage it equally. Equity is at the center of our work, and being concerned, because management and people are the key of all of good work, and there being some concern about whether or not the management structure will stay in place, or what other protections or considerations might be put in place. Could you speak a little bit about that as well?
Yes, I think everything that you said, it happens. And at Project Equity, we have a Thrive program where we don't just parachute in, do a conversion deal, and then leave the business. We're committed, as you said, to working with all of the stakeholders to make sure that this is as seamless and frictionless as possible, because on the macro scale, this is all about providing continuity to businesses, workers, and communities. And so whether an owner completely exits or stays on for some time, that's a phasing program that's worked through with all parties involved. In terms of the management structure, we don't just arbitrarily elect new leaders to replace the owner. We do a thorough investigation of the owner, collect their profile to figure out what are the skills that they actually contribute to the business. So they might be sort of the chief worker, but also the leader of accounting, and also the person who drives the marketing. And then alongside that assessment of the owner's profile, we assess the business's bench. Who has the relevant skill set to be able to cover and fill the gaps that the owner will sort of open up as they transition off. And then what the Thrive program does after the deal is structured and complete is work in a phased and cadenced manner to make sure that transition happens, like I said, seamlessly, and also with as little friction as possible. We find that is one of the things that raises the agency, the sort of voice in decision-making, and the pride and ownership over the business, is that they didn't have an outside party come and do a deal to get the business in their hands, they being in the workforce. They were active participants in purchasing the business from the owner and guiding it into the next frontier.
Mm-hmm. And such an important point, because it's technically, in terms of the model and accessing the loan to buy out the owner, is essentially a leveraged buyout. But sometimes when that happens, that level of intentionality doesn't take place, and there's a lot lost in that transition. and so happy, really excited, and really were excited for, I think we've been having these conversations for 2 years now about bringing project equity here, because you do have that intentionality about how you approach this work. Just can you talk about some of the conversations that you have with employees to get them to understand the transition?
Sure. So I think the primary conversation is level setting around the fact that the nature of their work is about to change in a significant way. This won't be a distinction without a difference. And so Evan talked about quite frequently, when you're targeting sort of baby boomer owners, you do have a workforce that is doing the lion's share of the day-to-day activities. But there needs to be some exposure and then phased immersion to the sort of top level corporate items of the business. So managing the financials, understanding the supply chains and the vendor relationships, being able to problem solve all of the sort of emergencies and exigencies that the owner and operator usually handles and addresses that wage earners might not usually see. And so the preliminary conversations are around sort of helping people rather to understand that the way in which you show up to work is going to change in a significant way. You are no longer only a contributor to this business, but you now own a part of this business. And there are, it's cliche, but to whom much is given, sort of much is required. And so once we kind of level set that mentality, we work through in a pretty methodical way all the different types of new skills and imperatives that employees are going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I would also add, I think that it's important that we convey to workers that they are empowered. There is this relationship between, business owner, worker, boss, employee sometimes that does not necessarily engender empowerment or agency in that worker, in that employee. And one of the things that we try to do is help the workforce understand that you can do this and you are allowed to have power and agency. And, we're going to help to structure this so that you can be successful. And we'll, being quite honest, we engage businesses where not all the workers want to be worker owners. Some workers just want to show up, do their stuff, and take their paycheck, and that's cool too. But quite frankly, because of the circumstances that many workers, and in particular Black workers, other workers of color, the circumstances that we come from, there's not a mindset that I'm good with being an owner, and I'm good with being able to lead. And so, I think part of the important part of our work is teasing out for folks that, yes, you can do this. And if you really, really just want to come to work into your paycheck, that's fine. No judgments. But we also want to make sure that folks understand that, hey, this is an opportunity for you to step up and to realize something that you couldn't ordinarily because you didn't have access to capital to start a business or buy a business, or it wasn't in your family mindset that you should be owning a business. That's an important part of the work too.
Absolutely. And I'll just, as we wrap up here, just quickly add for the all of you joining us today, to get involved, we'll want to get you engaged. For those of you who are business connectors, we want to engage you in co-hosting webinars and getting the word out, connecting with those who serve as advisors to help ensure that these businesses have the information that they need and that you are sharing this model broadly. Certainly our funders and corporate partners getting engaged to help expand the reach of this and the reach of the campaign to raise awareness, as well as collaborating with media partners and other support organizations, business support organizations and co-op developers, because we want to make sure that we are filling the right gaps, that this work is mutually beneficial, and that we're referring folks to the partnership to make sure that we're reaching all the businesses that are interested. So I'm going to ask the team to put Tehran's information in the chat as our local contact here. And then there's going to be information coming out from AWBI and from Project Equity, both on websites and via social media, to share more information, as well as you'll be receiving more information about those community meetings and estate planning and business succession planning opportunities department. So I want to thank the audience for joining us today. We are going to have our second of the year, but our sixth commitment series event in July. So please stand by for information. We hope that you have found this conversation insightful and that you've enjoyed the information we've shared today. Thank you so much, Evan and Tehran, for joining us today and being with us and sharing your insights and your brilliance with us. We look forward to getting started, and this is such important work that could really not only grow and scale our businesses, but sustain them and strengthen them in our ecosystem, which is so incredibly important. Thank you all again for joining us. We hope to see you at the next session in July, and we hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.